Hey, investors, welcome back to the show. We discuss real estate investing and building wealth. Today, we're going to discuss how to navigate the eviction process in Baltimore. I brought on a legal expert from DK Law, Diana Khan, and what we're going to discuss in this video is the eviction process, how long it takes, when you should start the eviction process, best day of the month to file with the courts, differences when using an attorney versus doing it on your own, cash for keys, and if that's a good strategy, and how to avoid evictions altogether. And if you are a newer investor or newer to Baltimore, evictions are painful in Baltimore. So just know that. And so get out your notepad, get ready to take notes. I'm always honored when I have a lawyer on the show because I know your time is valuable and I appreciate you sharing your value with the audience. So if you guys do us a favor, like the video, put your comments in for Diana. We'd be honored if you do that. So welcome to the show, Diana.
Thank you for having me, David. I always have fun discussing evictions. I know that's a weird statement, but I feel like you're going to live a life where squatters or evictions are going to be a thing if you're doing it right. If you've never experienced it, you need more properties. So let's talk about how to best navigate it.
Sure. Can you just start off with a little bit of your background, how you got to where you are?
Sure. So my name is Diana Khan. I am in Baltimore predominantly. I also speak nationwide on how to invest smarter and how to grow wealth through trusts, estates, LLC holdouts, like holding companies, all of that. So I have quite a lot of background within working in the investor world. Outside of that, I own a property management company that oversees 600 properties. So quite a lot of doors that I have experience on all of it, all the pain points for most people. I own a real estate brokerage that is majorly focused on investors who also have a real estate license. And then I also own a title company that does traditional, but also subject to novations, tax foreclosures, bankruptcies, all of that, that focuses more on investors investing in properties. So I see a little bit of everything. And then, of course, I'm a lawyer, so I own a law firm that does quite a lot of everything I just said on that side. And I also own a construction company. So,
And how did you always want to go that path for real estate, for litigation, or was that a natural
it was
progression?
natural. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was little, and I was going to go to law school, and I ended up taking some time between undergrad to law school to work with some realtors on short sale negotiations. And I think real estate found me more than I found it. And
Hmm.
then went to law school and I was like, I'm never going back to real estate. I'm going to do traditional and I'm going to do mergers and acquisitions and all the things that you hear lawyers want to do. But I think I've got a passion for real estate. And then when I got back out of law school, it just gradually navigated to it. And then I vertically integrated across the way on all of it. So
Yeah, that's awesome. For Baltimore in specific, and most of our audience is interested in investing in Baltimore. I mean, there's people that are invested other places. The eviction process is different in each state. Is that correct?
it is. Yeah. I think once you understand evictions or you understand sort of what happens, it's pretty standard across most states. It's just the nitty gritty. And here's the
Gotcha.
thing. If you're going to evict somebody out of your property for whatever reason, whether or not it's a squatter and you're purchasing with a squatter, whether or not it's a family member and you're, purchasing a foreclosure and there's somebody in there that wants to stay, the process is all the same, but you're not going to have somebody on the other side that's like, yeah, I'm getting out, let's do it, right? Like they're going to focus on it. And what people I think don't realize is you're going to get your property back, but the nitty gritty of the law is where people don't realize that if you're going to lose in court, it's going to be over something so technical and so small that you need to know, or you need to know the logistics of what locally happens.
Gotcha. Well, can you just discuss kind of the process in Baltimore City, Baltimore County?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things that I think people don't realize is you need a rental license, right? Like that's a conversation piece that I think people don't realize is vital. Up until October of last year, you didn't need a rental license if somebody was past their lease time. So it used to be, oh, well, if we're doing a failure to pay rent or they're not paying and we want to get them out, we need a rental license, but you don't need one if you're doing it, you know, for a tenant holdover, which is essentially the lease has expired and you want your property back. Well, as of October of last year, that changed. Now you need a rental license regardless, which is crazy to me as a lawyer because how is somebody going to get their property back if there's no rental license, right? Like there's people who are like, well, I didn't know I needed a rental license.
Yeah.
So the lease is over. Let's just get them out. And then you're like, yeah, you need a rental license for that too. And you're like, well, they're not letting me in. What do I do? And I'm like, you need a lawyer. Happy to help you. So the truth of the matter is, I tried a case in March of this year, and the tenant is she's given me trauma. I think I'm going to be thinking about her for the rest of my life. And she just wouldn't let us into the property. She wouldn't, like, she went in. It was just it was crazy. And I go to trial, and I had shown that she had refused entry to the property, like, probably like 7 times. So
Yeah.
the landlord could not get access. And I'm trying the case, and I knew she was going to be there. I knew it was going to be quite a lot. And I'm sitting there with one of my investors, and we're doing the testimony. And the judge cuts me off and is like, where are you going with this line of questioning? Your Honor, I'm trying to show we don't have a rental license. And the reason we don't have it is because this lady on the other side has literally called the cops on my client probably a dozen times. Judge looks at me and straight goes, there's no rental license requirement for a tenant holdover. And I'm sitting there like, I have a legal degree, you're a judge. And I'm like, with all due respect, the law changed in October. And very long story short, 30 minutes later, he said that he was not aware the law had changed 4 months previously. And I'm like, you're a judge. You sit on this docket. So I think when I tell people, if you're going to invest in Baltimore, one of 3 things need to be true that you need to sort of like know. One is, you're going to have a situation where you're going to need a lawyer, or you're going to lose money for an eviction, or you're going to do it yourself. Whatever it is. If you're going into this business and you're going to get stressed out when somebody A, doesn't pay you, or B, decides to fight you, you're not going to be able to make it. You need to have
Baltimore's
tough
not for
skin.
you.
Yeah, it's tough skin.
Yeah.
Just know it's part of the industry. Just know it's going to happen. Don't stress it. It's one of those growth factors. It's going to happen. There's going to be a situation, right or wrong, good guy, bad guy. You're going to end up in a situation where you're going to arms with somebody. And if this is something that's going to keep you up at night, you're just not going to make it here. You're just not. Just 3 facts about Baltimore.
Yep.
So I think if you're going to invest in Baltimore, you need to know 3 truths. You're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to evict somebody, or you're going to end up in some sort of situation where you're like, how did this happen? And the truth is, it's part of the course. And you can wake up and say, all right, we're going to deal with it. We're going to move forward. Or if you're the type of person that's going to really kind of crack at you, and you're just going to lose a lot of sleep over it, it's probably not for you. It's part of the course. As the more you invest, the more you're going to have a friend like me that you call and say, what do I do? And that's okay. It happens. And then fact number 2, the more you grow, you're going to need to realize that not every single house you have is going to be okay. You're going to learn about lead paint. You're going to learn about squatters' rights. You're going to learn quite a lot. And I'm here to help you navigate it. And if I'm not the one navigating it, at least know what to expect so that you're prepped.
Yeah.
And fact number 3, nuances matter. Your lease matters. What your statements say matters, and it's only going to matter when things go wrong. So be prepped for that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, kind of sum it up, the cost of doing business. When I hear you say, like, it's par for the course, for me, it's sometimes just the cost of doing business, and you build that into a vacancy rate. I want to retouch on one thing. Said that the owner is trying to get into the property. And I just want to, the reason the owner has to get into the property is that for the rental inspection to get the rental license.
Yeah. So you need a rental license at least in Baltimore City, Baltimore County. There's counties in Maryland, like Harford County doesn't require it, Anne Arundel doesn't require it. But I think most of the investors are looking in Baltimore County and Baltimore City. That's pretty common.
Yep.
You need a rental license, and for you to get one, if you already have somebody in the property, is you need access to the property, because A, you need to inspect it at least once, and 2, you're probably going to need a reinspection, or at least to fix the issues that the inspection had.
Gotcha.
And then if your property is older, you're going to need a lead cert as well. And if you buy a property, if you're an investor and you're buying a property with somebody in there and there's no rental license, prepare yourself. You're going to need to have access, unless they are by trade defined as a squatter, which, believe it or not, it's very hard to define what a squatter is. Or as judges like to say it, unauthorized individual on the premises.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a story, which is kind of cool. I appreciate you mentioned the story of the judge. I mean, I was a police officer for 9 years and have been in and out of the court system on lots of different cases. And the judges are human beings, just like inspectors in Baltimore City, Baltimore County. So they're different. They all have different things that bug them. They all have different nuances. Some can be super nice. Some can be just super anti-landlord. It all depends, and some interpret the laws differently, which is wild stuff. But they're
Mhm.
just going, no, I disagree with that. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm sure there's maybe a way you can go around it, but a lot of times what the judge says in court is what it is, even if they're interpreting maybe a different way. And you're just like, oh man, I guess you
Yeah.
just got to roll that way.
And I tell people that all the time. Going, it's the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
It is. You can hire the best lawyer. You can hire me. You can hire somebody that's much better than me. It's the wild, wild west. I tell people that work with me all the time. I might just expect me to lose. I was like, if I win the first time, great. And it's not because I'm bad at my job. It's not because the other lawyer's bad at their job. You just quite a lot of it is what is the judge going to say in technicalities. When you do a failure to pay rent, you don't need to be a lawyer for it. You can send an agent. You can send anybody. So my law firm will often send somebody who's a paralegal.
Mhm.
And, one of my paralegals went to a trial the other day and that girl fought hard. I mean, she went to bat against the judge, against opposition who had counsel, and she was right. And she ended up like the case got denied. And it was because you need to send a notice that's 10 days long. And she had sent the notice on the 10th and we'd filed on the 20th. By all intents purposes, are 10 days. And the judge representing the attorney representing the tenant, and I wasn't there for it, but he basically said, no, that's 10 days, but you need to file on the 11th day. And she went to bat and she fought it. And the tenant was there and said, I'm not going to pay rent. I can't afford it. The judge literally denied the case and said, retry it again because you should have waited till the 11th day. And she got asked to stay after. And the judge was like, you're actually right. It's going to cost them more because you're going to refile. Now it's going to be 2 months that they owe money for. So it's like, okay.
For the step-by-step process for evictions, can you just, I mean, very basic bare bones. I mean, there's some nuances in there, but how do you file for eviction? What is the process in like Baltimore City and County? They're kind of similar.
Yep.
If somebody's behind on rent, we'll say, hey, they're a month and a half behind, or maybe they're just 1 month and the late fees behind. I mean, can you walk us through the process real quick?
So here's the thing. If you got somebody who's behind, file. I don't care, if they pay you, I don't care if they are going to pay you right away. File, because we have 3 times of filings before you could just get them out. And what I mean by that is, let's say they're on day 5 and they haven't paid you, and you end up giving them a notice. You have to give them a 10-day notice of intent to file. So, they're behind, you got to give them a 10-day notice. And then you have to file after those 10 days are over, go to trial. You're filing for 1 month. That's it. That's what the judge is looking for. So
Mhm.
let's kind of use months because it's, I think, easier for people to kind of conceptualize what this looks like.
Gotcha.
Let's say your tenant is behind for February and you win a failure to pay rent in February
And
and you get,
for the audience, I'm going to slow you down just a little bit. I know what you're talking
yeah,
about, but some people that
yeah,
are new to real estate that are like, "What the heck is failure to pay rent?" That is, and can you just explain it just a little bit?
yep.
Like,
Yeah, tenant has not paid rent. They can't pay rent, whether or not they've behind they're whether or not they paid you in full or they've paid you a portion. If they haven't paid whatever your rent amount says, a failure to pay is you owe me money. The rent
gotcha.
ledger just says it doesn't have to be the full amount. If they haven't paid you what the lease says, you can file what's called a failure to pay rent. You fail to pay the full amount in the lease.
Got
Now, it's very unfortunate, at least in Maryland, is that when you file, you can only file for the month that they're behind. So let's say you win for the month of February and you get all the way to the point where, you win, there's a 4-day right of appeal where you have to wait before you take the next steps. Then you file what's called a warrant of restitution or a writ of restitution, which is essentially the judge says, okay, they didn't appeal. We did rule this. Here you go, stamped. This is going to go to the sheriff for the sheriff to go.
And that's
You then
after.
have,
I'm going to slow you down just a little bit because
yep,
you're fast, and I
fast.
understand, but it's just a lot of people that haven't done it at all, and they're just hearing this for the first time. It's
Yep.
super important what you're saying, and it's really good information. So you're filing that fail to pay rent, and then
Hmm.
if you win, you go to court and you win, you're getting the judgment, right?
Yep.
And then
So,
you have to wait for the 4 days
yes,
for the tenant to have a right to appeal, and then you can do the file for a warrant, correct?
correct.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
I'm just slowing you
Now,
down just a little bit because not everybody is, if they're purchasing their first property, this is all the verbiage is completely new to them.
and I just want to preface that when you win in court for that failure to pay,
Mhm.
you are getting a judgment to get the property back. You are not getting what's called a monetary judgment that they legally owe you the money, where you can now garnish their wages or anything like that.
Gotcha.
In Maryland, the view is that for you to file against the tenant, you have to give notice. Notice is literally put a notice on the door because you're trying to get the property back. But you're going to win the failure to pay, but you're not winning a money judgment, meaning the judge is saying they owe you this, but let's say they move out of the property and now you're like, oh, can I garnish their wages? The very simple answer is no. You didn't win a money judgment. You won a judgment to get the house back.
Gotcha.
In order to get a money judgment, you would actually have to physically serve them for that failure to pay rent, meaning that they have to get like a service processor. And then you can sort of bypass this whole idea of, okay, they've moved out. Let me sue them now for the money. So it's like a two-step process. But with that failure to pay, like I said, we go to court, you win. The judge now there's a 4-day period where there's a lull, where you're just kind of hanging out to see if the tenant will either pay or appeal the case.
Mhm.
So if you win on Monday, you're not really filing again till the next Monday, because 4 days starts on Tuesday, then it's Friday, and then you're like, all right, if I file today, the court's probably not going to process it, right? So it ends up being about a week. That writ of restitution, which is essentially the warrant that goes to the judge that says, hey, tenant's in appeal, tenant's in pay, I would like to get my property back. The judge will stamp it and say, okay, cool, you can get your property back. And that's essentially like a warrant. And that goes to the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office then has to schedule your eviction. In Baltimore City, over the summer, this was taking 6 to 12 weeks.
I'm aware.
Yes, it is a little bit
I'm
quicker
aware.
now. It's a little bit quicker now, but it's problematic because it takes a while.
Yeah.
And here's I guess the craziest part. Let's say you get to the eviction date and the sheriff says, I'll be there at 9 a.m. and you meet the sheriff and the tenant gives you the money for February and you have not filed anything else because they didn't pay you in February, right? But it's
Yep.
been 12 weeks. So now they're behind on March and April and May. Guess what? Your judgment is only for February. So if they pay you that February amount, the eviction is off.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big so if you got to this point in the video, this is a huge point that
Yeah.
Diana's making, and it's very important. It's extremely important. So I just want to highlight what she just said there. I mean, if you're filing for eviction, a lot of times in Baltimore, do you just recommend you're filing every single, well, before you even go to that, which I think rewind the video, listen to last like 1 minute, because it's gold right there. And you have to know that to be successful in Baltimore to get your property back. You're saying, so how long does this eviction process normally take? Because you kind of walked us through step by step. You said the eviction, I call it a lockout date. I mean, I guess it's the same thing. But if you're going to hear these are simultaneous. So if you hear somebody say, hey, we're waiting on a lockout date from the sheriff, it's the same thing as of what you said when you're waiting on your eviction date. Same thing, sheriff comes out, they wait there, they knock on the door, tenants got to get all their stuff out. Does the sheriff require, I don't know, this is great because our system's pretty good, but I just let somebody else do it. So I actually don't totally know exactly what happens anymore because I just not involved in the process.
That's
Does
fine.
the sheriff require somebody to be there with them? And do they require, I know before, sometimes they require multiple people to be at the property because you got to move their stuff out, right?
Yeah. So the sheriff in Baltimore City requires 4 people.
4 people.
One of them which can change the locks,
Okay.
and then 3 movers. Howard County requires 6 people. Prince George's County requires 20.
20 people.
Yes. And for Howard County, it's like if it's a townhouse, it's 6. If it's like a single family house, it's 10. It's tiered. And if you show up with not enough people, it's not
One of the
happening.
nuances you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
Sheriff's going to say, hey, we're going to have to try this a different day. Or does that just cancel it and it's done?
He reschedules it for another day. And if it's raining, he reschedules it for another day.
Yeah. So these are these nuances that you're talking about that are like extremely important that each, and as an investor, how I look at it is every day this person's in your property, you're losing money. So
Right.
whatever you can do to speed this up, you need to be super systematic. How
Right.
can investors be like super systematic? First of all, I want to hit a few things. How long is this process from start to finish? I file day one. When is the sheriff normally coming there to knock on the door for the tenant?
So I'm not going to tell you the short date because, it's unlikely. I
Yep.
tell people plan for 3 to 5 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
And
wild.
that's if they don't make a payment, if you don't have to refile again, if the judge isn't having a bad day and the case doesn't get thrown out. So it's a
Yep.
lot. So what my law firm does is we're very aggressive, right?
Yep.
And what I mean by that is most people file one failure to pay and they're like, okay, cool, like we're good. I'm filing one every single month. Okay, they haven't paid in February, they haven't paid in March, they haven't paid in April. I'm going to the March court date. I'm going to the April court date because now I'm lining up multiple judgments where it almost scares the tenant, right? Like the tenants, if they know that they can pay that February rent and they're waiting till July, they're not paying you anything else. But if you're hitting them with a judgment every 30 days, even though it costs money because you're filing and there's fees associated with all of that, you end up saving money because eventually your tenant's going to be like, yeah, man, like I can't keep getting away with this because now I have multiple judgments and multiple court dates and all of that. Now, the other really important thing is, at least in Maryland, if you've had 3 failure to pay rents granted in your possession, there is no more second chances. It's once you've had 3, the fourth one is, I don't care if you pay, you're out.
Gotcha.
So, it's if you're going to do a failure to pay, it's either if they're really behind where the money's excessive, right? Like if they're like 7 months behind, it's unlikely they're going to pay you $10,000 to the sheriff, right?
Yep.
But if you want to be that quick to react where it's 1 month, file the next month. And then if you know your lease is up, give them a notice that, I'm not renewing the lease so that if you end up getting to the end of that lease date, it's another filing. So it's just, I tell people it's not hard to get people out. It takes time, diligence, and it takes like attention to detail,
Mhm.
which if you're doing this right as an investor, those are all things you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. And I don't know if I missed it, but if you're filing from day one, you're saying on average, I know you mentioned before 6 to 12 weeks. Are you saying if you're filing on day one, kind of, I guess you said 3 to 5 months is what you should
Hmm.
expect as an investor?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a long time and a lot of money. So you got to have some sort of reserves as an investor. And this is just part of doing business in Baltimore because part of the game. It's part of the game.
I
Um,
cannot tell you how many clients I have where they're just, I mean, we all want to be good humans. I think even tenants, I don't want to say they're horrible human beings. They have their own rough stuff and we all want to like give each other a second chance. But I think the biggest issue I see with investors is when they do try to give the benefit of the doubt to their tenants. This person has a kid, this person lost it. Everybody has a story.
mhm.
For you, that's your business. And at a certain point, you need to sort of let go of that and plan accordingly because it's a business. And if this was not a house where you have a tenant living in there and you're looking at a bottom line and you're owning a pizza store, you would make a change right away. But with a tenant, you're looking at somebody's life. And I think it's really difficult for investors to look at it that way. But really, if you're going to have multiple properties, it's a business for you and you need to make sure that like there's a contract, you have to pay me, and if you don't, you don't deserve to live in this house. You can't live for free.
Yeah, I love that advice. It's really good. It's really good advice. You really have to be systematic. I found when I started just to be like, hey, this is our process. You don't need to hide it from the tenants. It's just, hey, this is how the business runs. This is when we file. If you lower your balance, then we can talk about it. But this
Yep.
is, we're just going towards the end of the eviction date. And the verbiage that I use that people, people always use is eviction is our last resort. We don't want
Yep.
to evict people. It is our absolute last resort from you not paying to live in the property. And I find that I ask my VA to just say the same thing. I'm like, hey, eviction's our last resort. We don't want to evict people. Sometimes you have tenants that are tenants from crazy, crazy town and they are affecting everybody's lives, whether they're damaging the property and doing nefarious things. Those ones you
Mhm.
do want to evict. It's like, hey, we're just have to keep everybody safe here, but it's really a last resort thing of like, hey, you're not paying. There's nothing else I can't help you because then I can't keep up my property. And if you think of it as if you can't keep up your property, everybody loses. The tenant loses because they get a bad property. You lose because you're losing money.
Mhm.
Your property gets into disrepair. But I found what I was just trying to share there is I found when I kind of took all of the emotions out of it and just said, hey, this is the process. We file on this day for every single tenant. Doesn't matter what's going on. It's just that because the tenant has time to recover. It's not like you file, and just like you said, it's not like you file and
Mhm.
they're getting booted out the next day. So they have time in this eviction process to
Right.
recover. And if they don't, unfortunately, nobody can live for free in somebody else's property forever. You're not running a nonprofit. So it's important to just think about it systematically, but make sure, and you already said this, I'm just reemphasizing it. Make sure your documents are very good. So make sure you have your documents, double checking all your rental license, your lead certs,
Mhm.
if you have to do that, if your property is built before 1978 or you haven't certified it lead free, and you're just making sure that you're doing it on the exact same day every day. What is the best day of the month? Are you saying for what is the best day of the month for filing for fail to pay rent?
I don't think there's a best day, just as soon as you're able to do it. I will say that if you're an investor with multiple properties, file it all the same day because then you get one trial date for all of them. I know that there's some bigger rental companies here who do like, I think it's like MD Rent Court. I think that they're great for a lot of things.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I think that they're affordable and they make it really easy for investors to work with third parties. What they do, at least I've noticed, or what my clients are reporting that they're doing, is they're holding a lot of failure to pay rent so they have a bulk amount. So, if you have like a bunch of investors and they file, let's say, 1,000 failure to pay rents in one day, each one of those cases is paying an appearance fee of $400 for the day of, but you only have to go to one trial. So
Mhm.
the problem with like Maryland Rent Court, I think, is that if they're doing that, you're not really following the systematic way. And I think that they get the job done, they evict people, but it's just file as quickly as you can. And you can, at least now, this year, you can file online. You don't have to go into a courthouse anymore. Before, you used to have to drive to the courthouse. Now you can file online and you don't have to be a lawyer to file it. So you should definitely Google the right way to do it. Make sure your documents are in line. But if you can figure that systematic approach out, you can get it done pretty quickly. And at least in the state of Maryland, if you are doing a failure to pay rent, you don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to appear at the trial as a lawyer. Should you be a lawyer? I personally don't think so, as long as you make sure the paperwork is right. I think the issue most investors face is the time, and two, the documentation. I think the documentation is what a lot of investors get stuck in. And it's a cycle. They keep refiling and not realizing that like a judge is going to throw it out over very small technicalities.
Gotcha. And so we file on the I'll share our process. We file on the 15th every month. Would you say that I should file earlier than that, later than that? Or would
I
you say, hey, and I file all of ours, like everything gets filed 15th every single month. If you are,
I think that's perfect because you've got the 10-day notice. You've got, they're 5 days late, then you give them the notice, and then the 15th is great. And I love the idea that you say this is what we do because it's just standard protocol, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think the issue with tenants a lot is like they pull at the heartstrings and you try to make exceptions. So if you make a policy for yourself, it's also a policy for them. And I love that idea. And certain investors will hire us for that reason, not because it's hard, right? Like some of this stuff is not hard. Some of the other cases, escrow cases, tenant holdover, sure, you need a lawyer for those.
Mhm.
But at least for failure to pay rent, sometimes they'll hire us and just be like, hey, listen, you don't pay on the 5th, it's going to a law firm. I don't control it. You can call me, you can tell me whatever you want. I don't have access to Diana. It's out of my hands. You have to pay the law firm directly at that point. So the 5th is when it's going to the law firm. It's up to you what you want to do. And most of the time, my property management company is in the same office, right? I talk to my investors all the time, but it's this idea for, I think, for tenants, the switch from the
Yeah.
landlord texting to like a legal letterhead. For them, it's like this like moment where they're like, oh, it's going to the law firm. Like I need to pay now. And it does make a huge difference.
I think it's a switch for both the tenant and the owner. I
Yeah.
mean, I found it super helpful. So we have eviction process, and then we also have a collections process. They are separate, just like you mentioned. It's not a
Mhm.
money judgment. The fail to pay is just for getting your property back. When it goes to collections, we're like, hey, you have to reach out to the collections team. And I think that the important thing for newer investors is often they will miscommunicate and they'll start communicating where they might be giving the wrong information. And I feel like
Right.
that is it's detrimental. And it's a conversation that me and my VA have because the tenants will try to like reach out to us. I'm like, sorry, you're out of our property.
Mhm.
It's with the collections team. Please reach out to this law firm. That's what the collections team. And so it's just directing them. And you just have to have a canned response. Can't be like,
Mhm.
a long paragraph and then the tenants go, oh,
Right.
well, what do you mean by that? You say, nope, it's over with the collections team. It's over with DK Law. Please reach out to them for anything. And it decouples any miscommunication that might be wrong information, because sometimes
Mhm.
we're humans, we give people the wrong information. Oh, sure, yeah, you can pay me, $500. That sounds great, even though you owe me
Right.
10,000. And
Right.
sometimes that might be one of those nuances that mess up. So if you decouple yourself, give it to a professional, it's actually very beneficial. It's healthy for you, lowers your stress levels,
Mhm.
but it also just streamlines everything. So you can just have that canned response. Please reach out to DK Law.
I will also state that, like, I think my job is easier than most investors for that reason, because investors will come with me and they'll bring their like paperwork and they're like, this is where I told the tenant this and this is where I told the tenant that. And they bring me all this evidence. And I'm like, dude, when you go to trial, the judge says there's three elements. Is your documents right? Are they current on their rent? And is there a rental license? Like those are the three questions. And if you ever sit in on these rental court hearings or escrow hearings or anything like that, when it's the investor with the landlord, I sit in the audience and I just kind of laugh because there's just all these irrelevant things and the judge is like listening to it and you're watching this thing unfold and you can tell the tenant is like complaining about the landlord and the landlord's complaining about the tenant and they're having this whole trial, if you will. And I'm sitting in the audience within 2 minutes, I'm like, it's going to go for the landlord. We're all going to sit here for 8 minutes because there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of like
Yeah.
evidence that is irrelevant in the eyes of the law. It's just it's legal factors. Like these are the factors to evict them. Don't worry about the rest. Like you have these three or four requirements. And if you do, you don't need to have a conversation with whether or not their cat died or their mom died. Like this is a contract. You need to pay me. I legally, the state has said I can give you 10 days of an opportunity to pay. And at that point, I can file. And that's what I'm doing. And I understand your cat died or your mom is going through a tough time. I'm really sorry about that. As a human being, I feel for you. But my lawyer is going to file on the 15th day.
Yeah. No, I love that. If somebody wants to do it on their own over using you and DK Law, you mentioned they can go online. Is that what you recommend people to start out doing that? Or you recommend them to just remove themselves from the entire process? Because a lot of times they don't have the time or they have to be there in person or post the letters.
In my opinion, you should not do it yourself. And this is not because this is what I do for a living and I want you to pay. I don't make that much money off failure to pay rents. I do them as a way because investors use me for trust. They use me for business startups. They use me for quite a lot outside of failure to pay. But my bread and butter, I can't turn away somebody who's got, if they've got 18 properties and want to do failure to pay, that's my in to discuss what my law firm actually is, my bread and butter, right? So while I'm not making a lot of money of failure to pay rents, in my opinion, anytime I take on a case that an investor has tried to like go through it himself, he's wasted months and months and months of just time because they didn't have the proper paperwork. They didn't do something right. And it's just such little nuances that are not worth it. So the immediate factor is like, I'm not going to hire a lawyer. I like to be type A or I like to keep it in house or don't worry about it. Just let it go. It just
Mhm.
out of sight, out of mind to me is worth any monetary gain or loss that you could have. And that's my factors for a lot of stuff. If we were talking about, huge lawsuits where we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, like, yeah, sure, like try to do it yourself if you can. But if you're an investor and you're growing your net worth by buying properties, go find another property, go flip another property, pay $200 to somebody else to deal with like going to court for 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Put your time and effort into something that's going to build your wealth instead of take away just time and energy. So I love what you said there. What are the costs for if you're using DK Law or using a law firm to file all your stuff and completely removing yourself? Can you walk me through kind of the costs?
Yeah, so we tier it. So if you're just doing a failure to pay, because like, I don't want you to pay me, it ends up being like $600 if we go from beginning to the evictions, right? Like that's the cost. But if I file and they pay you, right? Because I'm telling you, file on the 15th day every single month. I'm not going to charge you $600 if they pay you on the 17th. So I just kind of tier it with the way it works. And I have like a breakdown that's like, we do the notice. Notice is like, $50. The filing is like $110. And then we basically give you an invoice for the full amount, but you don't pay us until they either pay you or until we go to trial and it's done. And the reason we do that is because then you're not worried about the bottom line. You just know I'm not going to pay $600 if it's not going to the eviction. They're just going to tier me as it goes. And people like that because then it's like, here's 10 of them on the 15th. And usually by the 17th, we've had like multiple people pay, but I've made the phone calls. My staff has texted them. we've done the emails, like we've now documented it. If they don't pay the next time, we have all of the documents. So like it ends up for them, it's like, well, it's great. And if you're a property manager, which we do work with a lot of property managers, they do the same thing. They just send it to us and then they just bill the investors. So it's just out of sight, out of mind, and it just takes away a compliance portion of your job that you don't need to be doing.
Gotcha. As far as like working with investors, do you have a portal that they like upload their documents to, or how does that work?
So I do have a portal. I don't know, I don't normally like portals because I feel like when you are on the go like I am, I find in most of those things like, I have a title company and we have Qualia. And for anybody who's purchased properties, you get those emails from Qualia and you can log in and see where your file's at. I actually find that to be a nuisance. Like I don't want to create a username to see my stuff. Like I just want a human being to text. So we are sort of reinventing that idea. You have our office line. You can literally text documents to the office line. You can email them to me. You can literally screenshot and send it to me. I have no requirements on how you want to get it done to me. If you want a portal, I've got it. You can log in. You can do whatever you want. I have certain investors who they give me their Appfolio login and I work with their staff and I never talk to them. And they're like, we're going to give you a list of 10 properties and you can go into Appfolio on the 15th and pull it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I got it. And then I try to just communicate with people through text message like you would any, your friend. Like I won't necessarily respond if you text me at 8 o'clock at night, but it's just try to take the BS out of it is what I'm trying to do. Like I don't.
Gotcha. You're just trying to, I mean, I love that you're catering to make it easy for the user. And I like
Right. And then
that a lot.
for the most part, not every, I'm going to say I aim to send an email out to my investors every week on Fridays. And it just says, this is the property address. And I say, this is where we are this week. And sometimes it'll be the same email every week. Trial's coming up on this day. But at least that way they know if they haven't heard from me in a week, they're not forgetting that we have the file. It has the property address, it has the tenant's name, and then it'll say things like, I spoke to the tenant this week, they're not paying. You're welcome to respond back if you want the details, but at least that way you sort of have a visual by the end of Friday that like we've taken care of whatever we need to do. And my staff makes sure to touch the file once a week regardless. And we if we know a trial is coming up, we're sending a text message to the tenant, we're sending an email to the tenant, and then we're just sort of sending letters to the tenant. We're taking care of all that for you.
Just out of curiosity, how many evictions are you filing per like month?
Did you hear that I oversee 700 real estate properties? Just my own?
Yeah.
A lot. We do a lot. I mean, I have a staff of 18 that just focuses on the investor portion stuff. And then I have a bunch of VAs too. And I have other staff that focus on real estate and trust and wills. But we have a team of 18 that just focuses on this. They're all full-time staff. So I'm not going to answer how many I do, but you have to think about like that bandwidth of like filings. And for me, I'm very type A. So I think, again, Maryland Rent Court, I went to high school with one of the owners. I think he's great, but I'm very type A. So if you send me something, it's getting filed the next day. Like it's getting filed right away. And I do that very reactive. I'm not going to hold a bunch of filings. So if you want to, if you want to hire me on the 16th and I've done all my filings on the 15th, I'm still filing on the 16th and going to trial for that one court date, which to me, that's the respect I try to give my investors because I don't want to waste your time for my deadline. Like if you're hiring me, you're hiring a lawyer to handle it. I'm going to be pricier than MD Rent Court, but you're guaranteed it's going to get done that day. A phone call is going to get done that day.
Yeah, no, I mean, appreciate you sharing MD Rent Court. You're talking about Dana? Is who you're talking about? You went to high school?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I see she's great. I see her all the time. I've heard her talk. Like we've talked about it. I think that they're phenomenal. And I think they are definitely your first stop if you're doing things where it's like your first time, you've got one. Once you see the problematic tenant, like at that point, it's my professional opinion, you need to get the guns blazing and just take it off your plate.
Yeah, I mean, you're comparable to my Maryland Rent
Yeah.
Court, so I'll correct the record on that for you.
There you go.
You're comparable.
I do like once we have, I do have what's called like a flat rate that goes in a little bit over 1,000. And the reason there's a flat rate is because I have people who call me and they're like, I can't get the Senate out. Like it's been months. We've had like a bunch of filings. And at that point, I'm like, listen, I charge you a flat fee. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to come at them in every single possible way. And I'm going to charge you a flat fee and I'm going to guarantee I'm getting them out. I don't know if it's going to take me 3 months or 6 months. But rather than me tier every single filing and then we talk about all of it, just pay me this flat fee and I guarantee you I'll get them out. And a lot of my investors prefer that.
Yeah. I mean, the other fees that I want to chat about? You said that you need 2 people for Baltimore City, at
Four.
least 4 people for Baltimore City. Does that include, is that included in that cost? Are you going outside with an outside company? Are you using like Ryan and PE?
I do. I have outside, like Ryan and PE. We have like basically eviction squad, and we can offer it for you.
Uh-huh.
And we offer just the staff, because the problem is, at least in Baltimore City now, it used to be you used to have a specific time. Like it used to be like, we'll be there at 10, and they, it'd be 10 or 10:30, but you expected a sheriff.
Yeah.
Now they do it in 4 to 5 hour increments.
Yeah.
So it's like, we'll be there between 9 to 2 or 9 to 1. And the problem is that you can't call the sheriff and be like, what time are you going to come? And if you're not there, they'll leave. So the problem is that, like, the way we do it is we have like work trucks with employees that run Baltimore City. So it's really convenient, because we'll have one person be there from 9 to 12. And then when the sheriff gets there, they're close enough that we can basically have them run out if the tenant's there. Because if the tenant's not there, you don't need any of those things either.
Gotcha.
So we just try to, like, I don't do any of that. I just refer it right back out to the outsource if you want it to get done. And we just kind of let you, figure out if you want to get it done.
Just for investors, I mean, is that a per property cost? Is that like, I mean, is there an approximation of how much investors? I know it's a tough question. Basically, like you're using movers basically to move their stuff outside. I thought sometimes if the tenant's not there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you are the specialist and I am not, can you just change the locks and the tenant stuff stays inside, or does the tenant stuff have to be moved out?
It has to be moved out.
Has to be moved out. Okay.
It has to be moved out. It has to go outside 24 hours. In 24 hours, you then have to have it removed.
Gotcha. So the third party that you can refer out to moves it out to the curb
and then takes it to the dump.
And takes it. So are they just putting it straight in a dumpster and then rolling it out?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if the tenant has told you, like, there has to be a surrendering of the keys, right? I'm not going to go into the statutes. I've read them quite a lot. There has to be some sort of step where the tenant lets you know that they're out. So it becomes a little tricky when you know the tenant is out and it's fully furnished and you haven't gotten a key. And then I always have to have that conversation with, listen, if we tell the sheriff we got the key back, the sheriff's not coming out, and then you don't have to do the eviction process. But the problem is then you don't get that, yellow paper. Mm-hmm. And if the tenant didn't actually document the idea of surrendering the keys, you're living with 3-4 years of this idea that, like, you threw out a mattress and they may come back and sue you. And believe it or not, it's happened.
Gotcha.
So, it kind of becomes a little problematic, because then, while this is not, I guess, the avenue for it, we're also not talking about the next steps, which is that 45 days to do the final walkthrough, the security deposit, return, and what does it look like with a breach of lease versus, they've moved out. And the problem then becomes is, like, if they can sue you for 3 years for 3 times the amount of security deposit, the surrendering of the keys is very crucial, because statutorily, if they've breached the lease, you're not required to give the security deposit back. But when do we define breach of lease? Because if they give you the keys back and you don't get the pink paper from the eviction, did they breach the lease? So there's a lot of little nuances that probably one of your properties will experience every, like 2-3 years. But when it does come, it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuances, and definitely to speak to a specialist. I'd say my advice, just as a police officer in training, is like document everything, but also be like very careful of what information you're throwing out there, because the information that you're sending out to the tenant is documentation that they can have that goes to court and said, well, the landlord said this, the landlord cursed me out and said, hey, I'm throwing all your crap out, I hate you, blah, blah. When that comes out, I mean, that judge can go, oh, is that what you said, Mr. Hathaway?
So I can't speak to open cases, but I can tell you that if you are Facebook friends with me or on Instagram, I'm currently actively, in the last 24 hours from this podcast, I've been getting tagged in a wrongful eviction that occurred in Howard County, where the sheriff and the property manager allowed access to a property thinking it was the right property, but it wasn't, on a failure to pay rent. And the body cam footage has the 6 people removing all the items from the house for 11 minutes. And then the sheriff realizes they're in the wrong property. So I'm representing somebody on this particular transaction, but if you're Facebook friends with me or you check out my Instagram, there is a video that the body cam footage has been leaked and I've been tagged in it, and I cannot speak to the case, but if you want an experience of what it looks like on the eviction day process when the property is furnished and how things are getting moved, it is the full, like, the sheriff shows up, body cam footage is there.
Body camera footage shows the day Howard County Sheriff deputies and movers arrived to take everything out.
They said y'all did the wrong room, wrong apartment. Tell them to stop.
But I think for me personally, I'm representing somebody on this case, and it was a mistake.
Yep. No, I mean, it happens.
It was a mistake.
Humans are humans. It sucks. That sucks for everybody involved,
Right.
including the owner and the police officer and the eviction team. Sucks for everybody.
I will say that it changed my perspective on the eviction day, because I think I don't go out to the eviction day. Most people don't, right? Like they hire a team, you hire PE, you hire Ryan. And it just gave me a really different perspective of exactly how things are thrown out. And I think if you watch it, it'll give you...
Tough. It's tough, especially because you're like, that's somebody's stuff that they care about. And as an owner, when you're emotional about stuff, somebody's basically stolen $10,000 or whatever in rent, and you're just like, I want their stuff trashed, and you just want to take this anger out. Anger doesn't help anybody.
I was going to say, like, one more story just to give you an idea of the emotions. We had a client, my investor hired me, his wife died.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a solid year where this man wasn't paying because his wife died, he had young children. Investor tried to do the right thing, and I don't fault him for it at all. It was definitely a really tricky situation. He even offered him money to relocate, and the guy kept saying, I don't have anywhere to go. By the time I got hired, it'd been a year and a half, and it took me another year to get the tenant out. And it was just an unfortunate situation. Investor tried to do whatever he could, but even a year and a half after I got hired, at the trial date, this guy showed up and basically was like, my wife died, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, it's the story didn't evolve over a year and a half. Giving him a year and a half didn't change the story. And then we did end up getting the writ. We did end up getting the eviction date, all of that. And it was a very heartbreaking situation. So my staff were purposely emailing this guy, like, hey, like, eviction's coming up. Like, you need to get out. Like, you need to get out. And so while I typically don't provide service with an eviction date, I sent a private processor to his house with the eviction notice just to let him know that, like, it's happening. And he kept having his kids answer the door. So we didn't even serve him until like a week later. Yeah. And the day of the eviction, we get there and sheriff knocks on the door, and I'm there for this one. And I just had a feeling. And a very young kid opens the door, and in the background is a child, probably 4 or 5 years old, in a diaper. The entire house fully furnished. And the sheriff was like, where's your dad? And they go, you're going to have to call your dad. And so we call the guy, and he said, I had an unexpected emergency and I'm at Mercy Hospital. Let me tell you, I have never in my life been sitting there like, you're lying. Like, I'm sitting there like, right?
Yeah.
So the sheriff lost his cool at him and said, like, you left your kids unattended. You knew the eviction date was happening today. And the sheriff looked at me and he said, we can call CPS, which is, Child Protective Services, or you can give them another week to move out. And I said, I guess I'll give them another week to move out. Like, I will give them another week. I can't do this to these kids. I was convinced this man was parked like right down the street somewhere.
Yeah.
And I was so angry. And then a week later, the sheriff came out. Sheriff told him, if you're not out, we're calling CPS. We came out exactly, I think it was like 9 days later, and this man was still packing his truck. The time of he was out, but he was still with movers getting his stuff out. So I think what I really want to point out to investors is that, like, life scenarios happen and you want to be a good human, but you're sacrificing your business. And for this particular instance, it didn't matter if it was a month or 2 years. We still ended up dragging it so long because the story didn't change.
I think the biggest takeaway there is, are you helping or are you enabling? And often we're enabling even though we feel like we're helping.
Right.
And it's just like, hey, unfortunately, it's going to have to happen. I appreciate you sharing that story. The last thing I want to hit, and I appreciate all your time, cash for keys. Like, is this ever a scenario where cash for keys? I know you mentioned it early in the story that, hey, they had offered him money to move out. Is that ever a scenario that's a good scenario, or should investors just not have that tool in their tool belt?
In my opinion, you should not do it.
Okay.
I think because if you have a contract with somebody that says, I'm going to give you money and you need to get out, and they don't get out, the eviction process is exactly the same from day one.
Gotcha.
But if you, let's say, go to trial, right? Like, let's say same situation, you have a squatter, you have somebody, you file something, and we go to trial. And we file it, we get a court date 3 weeks later.
Mhm.
I could offer the same amount for cash for keys, and I could say, landlord is willing to give the tenant 30 days to get out, and we'll give them X money, right? And I'll ask the judge to notate it. And the big difference is, whatever it is, the judge will then write, if they're still there at the end of that timeline, you're skipping another filing, you're skipping the warrant, and it's going straight to the sheriff's office. So to me, it's almost worth it, right? Like if you're going to give them money and there's no guarantee that they're going to use that to get out, I'd rather you do it in front of a judge that then gives you the ability to use that document and know that in 30 days, if they're still there, I'm now bypassing quite a lot of the legal process.
So you're saying you can agree on a fail to pay rent. You can say, hey, I had talked to the tenant outside of court and we're going to give them $1,000 and they need to be out in
Yep.
30 days. I didn't know that. That's cool. So that's a legal way to do cash for keys. I mean,
Right.
I want to hedge that if anybody ever does cash for keys, which you're recommending not to outside of court, make sure the tenant moves out before you give them money and make sure it's like well documented if you do want to go down that route. So I've done it once.
They do come back. They come back.
I've done it once and it worked out fine. And it probably knocked off 2 months of shenanigans.
If you do
But
do it, I've written cash for keys stuff. So if you do it, visit the property the first week after they leave, just to make sure they don't come back. And if they do come back and it's only been a few days, you can call the police, because that's the only time I've seen the police actually tell them to get out. Because usually when you call the police with like a squatter or anything, they say this is a civil matter and we can't help. But you have a contract and it's usually within like that like small time frame. I've seen police make an exception. Same thing with like an eviction. If you have the sheriff meet you at the property and then you go back like a couple of days later, there's a squatter in there, which does happen very often in Baltimore City.
yep.
They can then, you can call the police and they'll look at those eviction notices and usually take an action if it's within a similar time frame. What does a similar time frame means? I think it's up to the police officer answering that call, but that's about the time I've seen it effective. And I do know somebody on Facebook, again, I'm Facebook friends with him, he'll probably tag himself when you make this live. He will, I'm not endorsing this, but he has messaged me and said that he will get paid and go in and take people out. I don't, again, he messaged me, we talked about it. I said like, I prefer the legal way because I feel like that's the only way that I can sleep at night, knowing that it's not going to come back. But there are definitely lots of stories about different variations of things that have occurred.
Yeah. I mean, we always want to treat people like people. We don't want to treat.
Yeah.
So, last question, I guess. What's the best way that landlords can avoid evictions like altogether? It's a pointed question.
I don't like renewals in your leases that are year long. I feel like having the out of month-to-month leases is good. So, obviously long-term renters are better stability, but I don't do renewals that are anything but month to month. And the reason I do it is because a year in, you're going to know if they're good tenants. And a year in, you could choose to sign a new lease for a year, but if you miss the deadline to like give them notice or anything like that, and now they're behind, again, nuances matter. So if you don't give them notice that you're not renewing the lease, you're now stuck in another year of evictions. Whereas if you have a month to month, you can give them notice to get out. So I don't really, if you're going to do a renewal month to month, leave it open. You can always offer another year to somebody if they're good tenants, but at least you're not worried about those timelines. Outside of that is make sure you have really good tenant placement requirements. I don't think that this is a realistic standard, but there is a property management company that I have never seen so little evictions on. And I will tell you point blank that what I see for them is they require that your income is 2.5 times your monthly rent. I think it's actually 3 times. And I've done the math and I was like, that's so unrealistic. Like if I'm moving into a $1,000, apartment, you're requiring me to make $3,000 a month of rent, like my income. And like, to me, it's like that imbalance to me seems a little crazy if I was to be renting, but I know that that's their requirement. And I think it's like their requirement is like a 750 credit score or 3 times the monthly rent. And I can tell you that their evictions are very low. And I can't help but think that barrier is so high that like you're gonna get a good tenant.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I'm answering my own question, it'd be screening. Like, make sure you're not bypassing screening.
Please also check Maryland case search. Like, I know that there's a lot of free,
MD, is it mdksearch.com or is it Maryland
Yes.
Case Search? Because we used it as
MD.
police officers back in the day, just so you know, like when we stop somebody and be like, let's check his record real quick.
Hey,
It's
listen.
like, it's easier than going to dispatch sometimes of like, oh, just pop it in. Oh, they've been arrested for burglary 10 times. Oh, Is it upstate?
MDK search will tell you quite a lot about people.
Uh-huh.
I will also tell you the failure to pay rents are no longer an MDK search.
Mm.
Tenant holdovers are, escrow cases are, squatters, like staying over on your lease, all of those are still in MDK search, but failure to pay rents in the last year have been switched over to an online portal separate from Maryland case search. And so while you're still seeing them, like if you had a failure to pay rent and I Googled you or I put you in MDK search, I will see failure to pay rents, but I will not see anything within the last year because it's now on a different non-searchable website. So that makes me a little nervous on what, in 5 years it's going to look like, because you're not going to see multiple failure to pay rents.
You'll see the eviction. Well,
Yes.
you'll see if they've been evicted, that's on there. You just won't see that they were filed upon for fail to pay rent.
Correct. You'll see the writ of restitution, you'll see a tenant holdover, you'll see escrow cases, but really just that failure to pay is no longer visible, which, you can take it one way or another, but a lot of these free tenant screening websites, especially if you're using like an in-house screening that's on like one of your rental portals as a property manager, I don't think that they're that great. I feel like the paid ones really do a little bit of better research on the people, because there's a few tenants that we get and they tell me they were screened. And then I go to like MDK search and like they've got like 10 failure to pay rent. And you'd be surprised. I do a lot of consults and like investors are talking to me on the phone. I'm like, what's their last name? And then while they're doing a consult with me, I'm looking them up on MDK search. I'm like, they did this 3 other times. Like exactly where because they're like, oh, this person had like a situation and we've done this. And I'm like on MDK search and I'm like, I can literally see that they've done this 3 times in 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, tenants are habitual. So newer investors should know that if we don't place anybody that's had an eviction. I mean, it's a non-starter for us. Doesn't even matter if it's 10 years ago. Had it once. I don't know, that's rough, but that's just a standard we stand behind that we feel like helps. I just encourage newer investors, hey, if you have somebody definitely that's had like an eviction in the past like 2 years, you need to run the other way as fast as you can, no matter how much they make, no matter what they do.
And they have stories. And I think that's the other thing. It's like so difficult. Like I myself have properties. I am an investor just like you guys, and I've fallen privy to it many times where they have a story or like this is what happened or COVID. Like they always have an excuse and it seems plausible. But every time I've broken my own rule, I end up regretting it. And it's not even I end up regretting it a year later. It's usually 3 to 4 months.
Yeah. Is there, I guess I got one more for myself question because I got you here. Is it better to have a tenant holding over or like a lease ending, or is it better to do the fail to pay a rent? Is it quicker or faster, or it doesn't matter? Tenant holding over.
100%.
If you have tenant holdover, and we're talking about your lease is expired, file a tenant holding over, how quick can you get this tenant out of the property?
A lot quicker because the appeal process is short. So the trial date, getting the original trial date is the same. There's a lot more flexibility with with a tenant holdover. There's flexibility on how you and the judge discuss things. You could put things on the record a lot more flexible. You can, if you sit in the courthouse, you'll hear attorneys say in a failure to pay rent, listen, I'm going to win. I literally tell them I'm going to win. And I say, the reason being is because this is not about your rent. You can pay me $10,000 right now. The law protects somebody from getting their property back a lot more than a contractual agreement about getting the lease paid.
Gotcha.
Because
so you're
you
saying
legally
like 2
own
months?
the property. Yeah.
Are you saying like closer to 2 months than 3 months for a failure to pay?
Yep. And again, I have a lot more luck because I can cut down the negotiations. So I'll tell tenants, if I win today, right? They're not listening to these podcasts. So this is free tip from what attorneys say is like, we literally tell them when I win today, you don't know when the sheriff will show up. It could be as quickly as tomorrow. I realistically know that's not going to happen because I know the sheriff is backlogged. But that's not something I need to share with them because it's true. Once you lose a tenant holdover, you no longer legally have a right to be there. I cannot take you out the next day. Legally, you're protected from that. But they don't have to know how quickly it is. So I tell them, you have 2 choices right now. We could pick a day you're going to be out together and tell the judge, and then you're guaranteed you're going to be there for another 15 days. Or I could evict you as quickly as tomorrow when I win today. And that conversation piece gets them out because then they go in front of the judge, and instead of it just being you win, it's the judge will tell them the landlord is giving you 15 days to get out. If you're not there on the 16th day, they can call the sheriff. And guess what? Now I have a deadline, and 90% of those tenants are out.
Love that. That's a huge golden nugget. So thank you
Yeah.
so much. Where's the best way people are having problem with, a tenant? What's the best way for them to contact you?
I'm insane. I give my cell phone number out on these things. I don't know who's going to listen to it, but it's fine. Just text me. My cell number 443-739-6724. Diana Khan on Facebook and Instagram. You can message me, whatever means, send me a carrier pigeon. If you can find me, I will respond quickly.
Gotcha. And we'll put all your contact, everybody, we'll put all our contact in the notes in the description below. Thank you so much for your time, Deanna. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
I will throw one more golden nugget in there. If anybody checks out my website, I have ebooks. I actually have an entire ebook about how to get squatters out of your property and how to do these kind of things. So everything we talked about today, literally just give me your email so I could spam you with marketing, and then you get all my golden nuggets free.
Love that. Love that. Thank you for that. Well, I appreciate you, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
See ya.